Get your black ass off this porch right now before I throw you in the dirt where you belong, boy!
The sergeant barked the words with pure condescension, crowding into the man's space and seizing Elias by the collar in one fast, forceful jerk.
I signed a deed to this house 91 days ago. My license and credentials are on the passenger seat of my car.
I don't care about your fake license, and your kind doesn't own property in this zip code. Ha! You think you belong here?
I live here.
Not for long.
The sergeant let out an ugly laugh and lunged forward, yanking Elias down the steps and slamming his upper body across the hood of the cruiser. He reached up and held the mute button on his shoulder microphone for 3 seconds, rendering the body cam completely silent.
Is this yours? No, that's not mine.
It was on your car.
I don't know how it got there.
Hands where I can see them.
Then his right hand dipped smoothly into his own tactical vest and came back out holding a loaded, unregistered pistol and a small baggie of white powder.
Look what we have here! A loaded weapon and a nice little baggie dropped right in front of us. You should have stayed on your own side of town, boy, because you're done.
What the sergeant did not know was that a hardwired security camera beside that front door had been streaming every second of it straight to a federal server. And the man whose collar he had just snatched was a senior special agent with the FBI. Welcome back to the channel. Before we begin, tell me in the comments what city you are watching our stories from today. I read them, and I pinned the best ones. Now, let's find out how a doorbell camera and a federal badge completely destroyed a corrupt officer's career. He never asked the man his name. He never checked the badge folded inside the worn leather wallet on the passenger seat. He never once entertained the possibility that the house behind him, the 2-story colonial with the fresh paint and the moving boxes still stacked in the front room, belonged to the black man he had already decided could not possibly own it. He saw a gray Henley streaked with primer. He saw old jeans and work boots. He saw a face and a street. And he did the ugly arithmetic that 16 years had taught him to do without thinking. And the answer he reached was thief. Red and blue lights slid across the door of a 2-car garage. Not a road. Not a parking lot. A garage. A home a man had signed for 91 days earlier, on a Tuesday, with a pen that shook a little because 47 years of renting had finally ended. By the time Sergeant Wade Corbin clicked the handcuffs shut on that front porch, he had already lost the case. The pension and the badge. He simply did not know it yet. And the reason he did not know it, the reason none of his instincts warned him, was a small black object he had flicked with one finger and dismissed 9 hours and 50 minutes earlier. He called it a doorbell. If you want to watch arrogance collapse in front of real, documented, unarguable justice, the kind that does not shout, the kind that plays back on a monitor while a courtroom holds its breath, stay with me to the end. Because the last 90 seconds of this story change absolutely everything. This is what happens when a man is arrested on his own porch for the crime of belonging there. And the walls were listening. The city of Marin does not sleep so much as it holds its breath at night. In Fairmont Heights especially. The good side. The quiet side. The side with the wide lawns and the security signs staked into the grass like tiny surrender flags. It was into this neighborhood, on a bright Saturday morning in October, that Elias Warner backed a rented moving truck up the driveway of 118 Larkspur Court. He was 47 years old. He had a wife named Renee, who was inside unwrapping glasses from newspaper, and a career he did not advertise, and a very particular way of moving through the world. Slowly, deliberately, as if he had spent a lifetime being watched and had made peace with it. He wore a gray Henley, gone soft at the collar, and a pair of jeans with primer on the knee. His hair was cut close and going silver at the temples. He looked, to anyone who cared to look, like exactly what he was that morning, a tired man carrying boxes into a new house. he did not look like a senior special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He did not look like a man who had spent the last 9 years of his life inside the public corruption section, building cases against the kind of official who believes the law is a rope for other people's necks. He looked like nobody. That was, in most rooms, an advantage. At 7:15 that morning, before the truck, before the coffee, Elias had done what any careful new homeowner does. He had installed his security system. 4 cameras, hardwired into the house's power and its network. 1 over the garage, 1 at the back door, 1 on the side yard, and 1 small, unassuming lens set into the frame beside the front door. A doorbell camera. It went live at 7:15 that morning. And it began, quietly, doing the only thing it was built to do. It watched, it recorded, it streamed, encrypted, to a server. Because Elias Warner did not believe in evidence that could be deleted by the person who needed it deleted, he would tell you later, if you asked, that a man should not need 4 cameras and a federal badge to be believed on his own front step. He would say it flatly, without heat, and he would let the silence after it do the arguing. The house had not come easy. Elias and Renee had saved for 11 years for it, had been passed over on 3 other offers by sellers who suddenly went another direction the moment they saw who was standing in the open house. Larkspur Court was the one that finally stuck, and on the day they closed, Renee had walked through the empty rooms, touching the walls, like a woman making sure they were real. "Oh," she kept saying, half to herself, "this is ours." Elias had stood in the doorway of a house that no landlord could ever take away, in a neighborhood that had already decided, in 100 small and silent ways, that people like them were guests here at best. And he had felt something loosen in his chest that had been clenched tight his entire life. He was home. For about 9 hours and 50 minutes. He was simply a man who was home. The trouble arrived 9 hours and 50 minutes after the doorbell went live. Sergeant Wade Corbin was, in the official language of the Marin Police Department, a highly proactive officer. He led the North District in traffic stops, in field interviews, in what the union newsletter liked to call aggressive community engagement. His numbers were beautiful. His clearance rate glowed. Twice, he had stood at a podium in his Class A uniform while the mayor pinned something shiny to his chest and called him a model of modern policing. There was another set of numbers. 44 complaints in 11 years. 39 of them filed by residents of the South Blocks, black residents, brown residents, the people who lived on the streets without the little surrender flag signs in the grass, complaints of stops without cause, of searches that turned up nothing and were logged as consensual, of a man who narrated the neighborhood to his rookies like a zookeeper describing the animals. 0 of those 44 complaints had ever produced a single day of discipline. Every one of them bore the same signature at the bottom. In the box marked disposition, unfounded, Deputy Chief H. Pruitt. That is the whole machine. In one line, a man who abused people, and a man above him who signed the abuse away, and a filing cabinet full of proof that everyone had agreed not to read. On this particular Saturday evening, Sergeant Corbin was riding with a rookie named Kyle Brennan, 3 months out of the academy, still ironing creases into a uniform he was proud of, still believing most of what he had been told. Brennan was the audience. Corbin always performed better with an audience. They rolled onto Larkspur Court at 5:05 that evening because dispatch had put out a soft call. A neighbor reporting a possible break-in. A man carrying items into the Halverson place. The Halversons had sold and moved to Arizona. The house was now 118 Larkspur Court, and the man carrying items into it owned the deed. But the call said man carrying items, and Corbin's arithmetic did the rest before the cruiser had even stopped. Elias was on the porch, setting down the last box. When the light hit the garage door, he did not startle. He set the box down gently, straightened, and turned to face the street, with his hands open and visible at his sides. It was the posture of a man who had watched, over a lifetime, exactly how these encounters go wrong, and had decided long ago to give them nothing to escalate. Step away from the house. Corbin came up the walk fast, one hand riding the grip of his holstered weapon, the flashlight already up and cutting into Elias's eyes. Brennan trailed a step behind. Uncertain, there was no good evening. There was no sir. We got a call. This is my house. Officer, Elias said. His voice was level, low, unhurried. I moved in this morning. My wife is inside. My paperwork is on the counter. I didn't ask whose house it is. Corbin stopped at the bottom step and let his eyes travel up and down. Slow and theatrical. The way a man does when he wants you to know you are being appraised and found cheap. Break-in call. Man, matching your description. And I'll be honest with you. He smiled. It was not a kind smile. You don't exactly look like you belong on this street. That was the version for the camera. The coded version. The one a careful man says while a rookie is watching and a body cam is still recording sound. This street, your description. You don't belong. Every one of those words doing the work of an uglier word he was. For the moment, too careful to say out loud, but the register was a costume, and it would not survive the encounter. Because when Elias, calm and unhurried, offered to walk him to the deed on the counter and the license on the passenger seat, the costume slipped, and what was underneath came out plain. I don't care about your fake license. Corbin's voice dropped, and the pleasantness went with it. And your kind doesn't own property in this zip code. There it was, the quiet part and the loud part, and the discovery, if you needed the encounter to teach it to you, that they had always been the same part. The coded insult and the naked one came from the identical place. The badge simply let Wade Corbin choose which one to wear, depending on who he thought was listening. I understand, Elias said, and he did not raise his voice, and he did not step down, and he did not reach for anything. May I ask what description you received, because I'd like to help you clear this. My deed is inside on the counter. My license is in my wallet on the passenger seat of my car. Right there. I'm happy to walk you to either one. You're happy to? Corbin's smile thin. You hear that? Brennan, he's happy to. And here is the thing about that moment that the sergeant would never understand. Not on the porch. Not in the cruiser. Not in a cell. Elias Warner had not resisted. He had not raised his voice. He had not clenched a fist or taken a step. He had done the single most dangerous thing a man in his position can do in front of a man like Corbin. He had asked a question. He had asked why. And to Wade Corbin. Why? From a man who did not belong was not a question. It was insolence. It was a challenge to the natural order of a street, with signs staked in the grass. It was the one sin he could not forgive. And so the costume came all the way off. Corbin closed the last of the distance and took Elias by the collar in one hard jerk, half lifting him, marching him down off his own steps. You think you're going to stand up there and lawyer me on my street? He growled. Low and close, now. The words meant for no camera and no rookie. Only for the man in his grip. I will throw you in the dirt where you belong. Elias let himself be moved. He did not fight the hand at his collar. He got his feet under him, and he kept his voice steady even as his shoulder hit the wall. I'm not resisting. Officer, my hands are open. My wife is inside. Her name is Renee. Please do not let anyone frighten her. Some people call this fear. It is not fear. It is a protocol. Learned. In a country where the survival of a traffic stop can hinge on whether your hands were visible at the correct second. Elias Warner had run this protocol his whole adult life. He ran it now like a man reciting a prayer he had memorized before he understood the words. Corbin watched him do it. And it only made him angrier. Another officer, seeing that practice compliance, might have recognized it for exactly what it was. A man who had clearly been through this many times. A man who knew the choreography of survival far too well to be the reckless burglar the call had described. Corbin saw it and read it backwards. To him, the calm was arrogance. The precision was a con. A man who knew the rules that well, he figured, was a man who had been getting away with things for a long time. Everything Elias did to make himself safe, Corbin translated into evidence of guilt. Because Corbin's mind was a machine that took in every input and produced the same output, regardless of what he was shown. Brennan, standing off to the side, felt the wrongness of it in his stomach before he could put a word to it. The man was not behaving like a burglar. Burglars ran, or bagel, or got loud. This man was quiet and exact and unafraid in a way that did not fit the story his sergeant was telling. But Brennan was 3 months out of the academy, and Corbin had 16 years and a chest full of medals. And so Brennan did what the wall teaches a young man to do with a doubt. He swallowed it. Behind him, he could not see the street, but the little black lens beside the front door could, and 900 miles of fiber and 1 encrypted server away. So could a machine that never blinked. Inside the house, Renee Warner's phone lit up with a soft chime. Motion at your front door. She swiped it open. Saw the feed. Saw her husband's hands flat against the garage and a sergeant's flashlight in his face. And she did not scream, and she did not run outside. Her husband had taught her, years ago, exactly what to do. She pressed record on the live feed, and she started walking calmly toward the front of the house with the phone held low. And she began, very quietly, to count. 2 neighbors watched from their windows. Elias saw them in the reflection on the garage door's glass panel. A curtain twitched aside at the house across the street. A face at an upstairs window next door. 2 people, both of whom had waved at the moving truck that morning. Neither of them came out. Neither of them called down. They watched a man be pressed against his own home. And they decided it was none of their business. And they let the curtain fall. That is the quietest sound in this whole story. Not the cuffs. The curtain. Kick your feet back. Corbin order. And Elias complied, spreading his stance. And Corbin ran his hands over him fast and rough, and found nothing. A phone. A set of keys. A wallet still in the car. No weapon. No contraband. Nothing at all. From in like Corbin, nothing is not an answer. Nothing is a problem to be solved. He glanced back at the cruiser, at the dash camera. And then he did a small thing that no one on the porch registered, but that a machine in Washington would one day play back 41 times. He reached up to the microphone, clipped to his shoulder, the audio channel of his body camera, and he held the mute button. 3 seconds. He held it for 3 seconds. 41 seconds before anything else happened. A man does not mute himself by accident. A man mutes himself when he already knows what he is about to say cannot be on the record. Officer Brennan, Corbin said, and now his voice was warm again. Performing. Go take a look in the vehicle. Driver's doors unlocked. Brennan hesitated. It was a small hesitation. The kind you would miss if you weren't watching for it. He looked at the calm man against the garage. And he looked at his sergeant. And something in him, some part still 3 months out of the academy and still decent, pulled the wrong way for exactly 1 second. Then he did as he was told. Because that is what the blue wall is. It is not built by monsters. It is built one small obedience at a time by ordinary people who decide, in the space of a single second, that keeping their head down costs less than raising it. Brennan opened the car door, and while he did, Sergeant Wade Corbin leaned into the shadow of the porch, and his right hand dipped toward his own vest, and it came back out 3 seconds later, holding a small plastic baggie of white powder and a snub-nosed revolver with the serial number filed smooth off the frame. The drop, well, now, Corbin's voice climbed, delighted, pitched to carry to the rookie and to the twitching curtains. Look what we have here, right there on the porch. In plain view. He held the gun up into the streetlight. Loaded .38. Serial filed off. And a nice little baggie to go with it. He turned to Brennan. Bag it. Possession with intent. Felon in possession. Plus the break-in. This one's going away for a while. Brennan stood by the car with the door still open, and his face had gone pale. Sarge, he said, and his voice cracked on it. Sarge, I didn't see where that came from. It wasn't in the pat-down. It wasn't on the porch when I said bag it. Brennan. Corbin did not raise his voice. He did not have to. His eyes did the raising loose kid. They dared the rookie to finish the sentence. Brennan looked at the man against the garage. He looked at the gun. He looked at his sergeant. And then he broke eye contact with all of it. And he pulled an evidence bag from his belt. And his hands were shaking as he opened it. Another brick. Another small obedience. The wall went up 1 course higher. Right there on the welcome mat. In the light of a doorbell that could not be turned off, Corbin wrenched Elias's arms back and snapped the cuffs closed. And he snapped them tight. Tighter than he needed to. Tight enough that the steel bit into the skin and left a red blongs from sand. Raw line around each wrist. He leaned close. And his breath smelled of gas station coffee. And he said it soft. Just for Elias. Just under the muted microphone. You should have stayed on your own side of town. Boy. Elias did not flinch. He did not struggle. He turned his head. Just enough. And he looked Wade Corbin dead in the eye. And there was nothing in his face but a terrible, patient calm. Make sure you spell my name correctly on the report. Sergeant. Elias said quietly. W-A-R-N-E-R. You're going to want to have gotten it right. Corbin laughed. It was a short, ugly bark against the evening quiet. I'll spell it however I feel like. Inmate. And he pulled Elias off the mat toward the cruiser. 14 minutes. That is how long it had taken. From the moment the light hit the garage to the moment the cuffs closed. 14 minutes for Wade Corbin to decide who a man was. Invent the evidence to prove it. And write the lie into the world. It would take the truth 91 days to catch him. But the truth had a head start he did not know about. The truth had been recording since 7:15 that morning. Renee reached the front window as they were folding Elias into the back seat. She did not run out. She stood just inside the glass. Phone low and steady. Still filming. And when Elias glanced toward the house, one look. No more. She gave him the smallest nod. The one that meant, I have it. I have all of it. Go. That is the second quietest sound in this story. A wife who did not scream. Because her husband had taught her that the recording was worth more than the reaction. At the cruiser, before Corbin closed the door, the radio on his shoulder crackled. Brennan had run the plate on Elias's car. The way you are supposed to. And dispatch was calling it back. North 6. Be advised. The dispatcher's voice came, bored and clear. That vehicle returns registered owner, Elias Warner. Same name returns as owner of record for the residence. 118 Larkspur Court. No wants. No warrants. Owner of record on the property. Cope. For one long moment, nobody on that lawn moved. Brennan turned and looked at the mailbox at the end of the driveway. The numbers were screwed to the side of it. Brass. Catching the last of the light. 1. 1. 8. He looked at the man in the back of the cruiser. He looked at the house. And you could see it hit him. The whole shape of it. All at once. The call was wrong. The man owned the house. The gun came from nowhere. And he had bagged it anyway. Here is where a different sergeant, a merely lazy one, might have found a face-saving exit. Big misunderstanding. Let's get those cuffs off. Sorry for the scare. Here is where information should have ended it. It did not end it. Because Wade Corbin's problem was never that he lacked information. His problem was that he did not want the information to be true. And a man who does not want to see something will not see it no matter how brightly you shine it in his face. Corbin keyed his radio back. Yeah. Copy that. A beat. Then. To Brennan. Loud enough for the dispatcher's confirmation to mean nothing at all. Probably stole the guy's identity. Guys like this run 3. 4 names. Registration doesn't mean a thing. He shrugged. And he closed the cruiser door on Elias Warner with a solid, final thunk. We'll sort it downtown. That is the beating heart of this whole story. And it happened in 11 seconds on a driveway. The machine told him the truth. Clean. Official. Unarguable. And he heard it. And he set it down. And he kept building his lie on top of it. You did not need more evidence. Sergeant, you needed to want to see it. They booked Elias Warner at the North District Station at 6:14 that evening. Possession with intent to distribute. Felon in possession of a firearm. A charge that would require inventing a felony he did not have. Which was, to a man like Corbin, a Tuesday. Resisting. Burglary of a dwelling. They took his phone. They took his keys. They took his wallet. And inside the wallet, in a slim credential case, was a set of federal credentials, a photo, a badge, the seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the words, Senior Special Agent. The booking officer stopped. He held the case up. Sarge, he said slowly. Sarge, this says FBI. Corbin walked over, took the case, glanced at it, and snorted. You can buy these online for $50. Novelty store. Half the guys we bring in got a fake badge in the glove box. He tossed it into the property bin. And hey, impersonating a federal officer, that's another charge. Add it. He was grinning now. He thought he had found a bonus. Elias watched the credential case land in the plastic bin. And he said nothing. This was the moment. This was the exact fork in the road that every man in his position has stood at. He could have stood up. He could have used the voice he used in federal courtrooms and said, I am a senior special agent. This is a genuine credential. Call the field office. And every one of you had better start being very careful. One sentence. It would have unlocked the cuffs. It would have turned the room. It would have made Wade Corbin's face go white in 30 seconds. He did not say it. His attorney, a court-appointed defender named Sarah Kessler, buried under a caseload, called in for the arraignment, leaned in when she finally reached him in the holding area and whispered, baffled, Mr. Varner, I don't understand. You're a federal agent. Why on earth are you sitting here? Say something. Make them call somebody. This is over in an hour if you just say the words. If I say it, Elias said. Then I get treated like a human being. And the man behind me in the next cell, the one with no badge, no title, no wife filming through a window, he gets treated exactly the way I just was. If I have to announce my rank to be given the dignity of a citizen, then the system is already broken. And my saying it just proves the badge is the only thing that works. He looked at her, and his voice was very gentle and very hard. I'm not going to make them treat me well. I'm going to make them show a jury how they treat a man they think is nobody. My silence is the evidence. That is Elias Warner refusing the first privilege, the privilege of being believed. He had the key in his pocket the whole time, and he would not use it. Because using it would let the system off the hook it deserved to hang on. Sarah Kessler sat back, and she looked at him for a long moment, and something changed in her face. The way it changes in a person who came into a room tired and cynical, and suddenly realizes they are standing next to something they are going to have to be brave enough to match. Renee Warner was not allowed to see her husband that night. She sat in the lobby of the North District Station for 4 hours on a bench bolted to the floor, holding a phone that contained, though no one in that building yet knew it, the entire truth of what had happened on her own porch. She did not make a scene. She did not wave the footage in anyone's face. Elias had been clear about this. Years earlier, on a quiet night when they had talked through how it would go if it ever came. You do not hand them the evidence in the lobby, René, where a copy can quietly vanish. You keep it. You give it only to people who cannot make it disappear. So she kept it. She backed it up twice more from her seat on the bolted bench, to 2 more places, in 2 more ways. And then she waited. And she counted. Because counting was the only thing keeping her from screaming. By morning, the machinery that protects men like Corbin was already turning. The union representative had been at the station before sunrise. A department spokesman had already drafted a tidy line about a lawful arrest and a recovered firearm. The story was being set in concrete, before the concrete of the truth had even been poured. That is how it works. That is how it has always worked. The lie gets its boots laced and its uniform pressed, while the truth is still filling out a visitor's form in the lobby. The thing about a lie, though, is that it has to keep breathing to stay alive. And every breath it takes leaves a print. Over the next 72 hours, Wade Corbin fed his lie. He wrote the arrest report, a small work of fiction in which a suspect matching a break-in call was found in possession of a firearm and narcotics in plain view on a porch and resisted lawful detention. He wrote that his body-worn camera had, unfortunately, malfunctioned during the encounter, a known issue with the older units, batteries, not what they used to be, cold weather. You know how it is. He wrote it because he had muted it himself, and he knew the audio was gone. And he assumed, as men like him always assume, that gone meant gone. He assumed the only cameras that mattered were his. He had forgotten the doorbell. 91 days later, in the fluorescent gloom of the Marin County Courthouse, Sergeant Wade Corbin put on his Class A uniform, and he pinned on his medals. And he walked to the front of courtroom 6 and placed his right hand on the Bible. Do you swear to tell the truth? The whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you God. I do, Corbin said, and his voice was deep and warm and certain. And the jury, 12 people from the good side of Marin, 12 people with signs in their grass, leaned in and believed him before he had said a single word. Assistant District Attorney Grant Whitlock walked him through it like a man leading a witness he had led 100 times. Name, rank, years of service, 16 years, serving the people of Marin. The jury smiled. Corbin smiled back. Then Whitlock took him to the night of the arrest. And Wade Corbin, under oath, before God and 12 citizens and a court reporter's flying fingers, told the lie. He testified that he had responded to a break-in call. True. He testified that the suspect had been uncooperative and hostile. False. And the first print, he testified that he had recovered a loaded firearm and a quantity of narcotics from the porch in plain view. False. And the second print, he testified that his body camera had malfunctioned, so unfortunately there was no footage of the recovery. False. The third print, and the fattest one, because a man who says there is no footage has just told the whole world exactly which footage will destroy him. Elias Warner sat at the defense table in a cheap suit that made him look small and beaten, which was, again, a performance. He was not small. He was counting. He was letting the sergeant commit, letting every lie land on the permanent record where it could never be walked back. Because a lie told to a reporter is an embarrassment, but a lie told under oath is a felony. And Elias Warner traded in felonies. He needed Corbin to say there is no footage. And Corbin, God help him, said it twice. And now, the reveal. Not the one you are expecting. Not the one from 1,000 other videos. Where the defendant stands and announces his title and the room gasps, Sarah Kessler rose for the cross-examination. And she did not ask Wade Corbin who she was. And she did not ask him to identify Elias Warner's badge. She asked him one question. Sergeant Corbin, you've testified, under oath, that your body camera malfunctioned, and there is no video of this encounter. Is that your testimony? That's correct. Corbin was relaxed. This was the safe part, and there were no other cameras present. No dash camera angle? No bystander. Nothing that recorded what happened on that porch. Nothing that I'm aware of. No. He almost smiled. It was a residential street. Quiet. Sarah Kessler nodded slowly. It was a residential street. She agreed. Your Honor. The defense moves to admit Exhibit 14. The bailiff wheeled a monitor to face the jury, and Sarah Kessler said, very quietly, Sergeant, the home at 118 Larkspur Court is protected by a sentinel security system. 4 cameras, hardwired into the house's power supply and its network. They do not run on batteries. Sergeant, they cannot be switched off from outside the home. And they had been recording and streaming to an encrypted off-site server since 7:15 that morning, 9 hours and 50 minutes before you arrived. She let that sit for exactly 1 second. You flicked one of them with your finger. Sergeant, on your way up the walk, you called it a doorbell. The courtroom went so quiet, you could hear the air handlers breathing in the walls. Wade Corbin's hand, resting on the rail of the witness box, had stopped moving entirely. Somewhere in his 16 years of certainty, a floor had just dropped out, and you could watch him feel for it with his foot and find nothing there, and she pressed play. The courtroom filled with the sound of a doorbell camera's audio, crisp and clean and merciless. And there on the monitor was Wade Corbin coming up the walk in 4K. From 3 angles, time-stamped and unbroken. And now the footage began, all by itself. To take his testimony apart one sworn sentence at a time, he had told this jury, under oath, that the suspect was uncooperative and hostile. On the monitor, a man in a gray Henley set down a box, turned, and put his open hands flat against his own garage door, while he narrated his own compliance in a voice as steady as a hymn. Lee won. And the footage buried it. He had told this jury he recovered a loaded firearm and narcotics from the porch in plain view. On the monitor, His own hand disappeared into his own tactical vest and came back out holding the gun and the baggie he would swear. Under oath, he had found lying on the boards. Lie 2. And the footage buried it. He had told this jury, twice, that there was no video, that his camera had malfunctioned, that the street was quiet and nothing had recorded what happened on that porch. And the video that could not possibly exist was playing. Right now, in front of 12 people, with his own voice crisp and clean on the speakers, there was the mute button, held for 3 seconds, 41 seconds early. There was the pat-down that found nothing. There was Brennan opening the car door on command, at the exact moment the drop was made. Lie 3. The fattest one. The one a man tells only when he is certain the truth is already dead. Buried. The machine did not shout. It never does. It simply played. Frame by patient frame. The truth that a man had decided he did not want to see. And you did not need Elias Warner to stand up and say a word. The walls said it for him. Wade Corbin's face, on the witness stand, went the color of ash. Sarah Kessler did not stop the video. She let it run. She let the jury watch the whole 14 minutes, unedited, in real time, because she understood that a summary can be argued with, but an unbroken timestamp cannot. She let them watch the pat-down that found nothing. She let them watch the dispatcher's voice come crackling over the radio. Returns registered owner, Elias Warner. Owner of record, 118 Larkspur Court. No wants, no warrants. And she let them watch Wade Corbin hear it, and pause, and close the door of his cruiser on it anyway. That was the frame she chose to freeze, not the drop. The moment after the truth had been spoken aloud over his own radio, when a man decided, with the whole thing laid out in front of him, that he simply would not believe it. He was told. Sergeant, Kessler said quietly, to the ash-faced man on the stand. Dispatch told you. It is on your own radio channel. In your own case file. The man owned the house. And you said, and I am quoting, the very footage you swore under oath did not exist. Probably stole the guy's identity. She let it hang in the silent room. You did not need more evidence. You had all of it. You needed to want to see it. And you did not. Somewhere in the gallery, someone began, very softly, to cry. The jury did not gasp. It went silent. The specific, total silence of 12 people watching their own certainty come apart. One juror in the back row, a man who had smiled at Corbin's medals an hour earlier, put his hand slowly over his mouth. The prosecutor, Grant Whitlock, half rose from his chair as if to object, and then realized there was nothing on earth to object to, and sat back down, and did not look at his witness again. And then Sarah Kessler zoomed the footage on the monitor, and she froze it, and she said, for the record, Your Honor, note the timestamp. On screen, the numbers ticked and held, and beside them, on the second monitor, she put up a still photograph taken at booking. Elias Warner's wrists, ringed with the raw red line, the cuffs had bitten into the skin. The wound was still there 91 days later in the photo, small enough that a man could keep his composure, deep enough that a jury could not look away. That's a man who did not resist. Sergeant, she said, cuffed hard enough to mark him, on his own porch, for the crime of asking why. But footage of one bad arrest does not, by itself, bring down a machine. It brings down a man. And this was never a story about one man, because when the FBI field office, quietly, at Elias Warner's insistence, from the sidelines, because he had recused himself entirely and refused to touch his own case. Pulled the thread that the doorbell handed them. The whole sweater started coming apart. They subpoenaed the North District complaint records, and they found 44 complaints against Wade Corbin. 39 of them filed by Black and brown residents of the South Blocks. 0 disciplinary findings. Every single one closed unfounded. Every single one signed off by the same deputy chief. They found, in a text thread Corbin believed was private, the 2 words that a filing cabinet had spent 11 years politely refusing to read, a message in which he called the residents of the South Blocks strays, and, 3 weeks later, in another, the infestation. Not the word he was too careful to say on the porch with a body cam rolling. The words he said when he thought no one who mattered was listening. Read one after another. The complaints stopped being paperwork and became a neighborhood. A nurse coming off a night shift. Stopped 4 times in a single month on her own drive home. Her car searched each time. Nothing ever found. Each stop logged as consensual. A father pulled over with his kids in the back seat. Made to sit on a wet curb while Corbin checked something. His children watching him through the window. A 20-year-old named Terrence Mercer, whose file was thin and whose ending was the worst one in the entire cabinet. 44 of them. 39. Filed by people from the South Blocks, and at the bottom of every last one, in the same blue ink. The same disposition. The same signature. Unfounded. Deputy Chief H. Pruitt. Read together. The pattern was undeniable. Mathematical. Damning. But that is precisely what a pattern is. Something you can only see if you are willing to lay all the pages side by side and actually look. For 11 years, the department had made very sure that no one ever laid the pages side by side. They kept them in separate files, in separate years, under separate case numbers, so that each one could be waved away on its own as a misunderstanding. A bad night. One person's word against a decorated sergeant's. The genius of the machine was never in hiding the evidence. It was in keeping the evidence scattered. And that thread, those 44 buried complaints, is where the case should have become simple. And it is where, instead, everything nearly fell apart. Because here is the part that a lesser version of this story would skip. Here is the all is lost. He was not brought down by the evidence. The evidence was overwhelming. He was very nearly saved by the system that was supposed to process it. Within a week of the footage surfacing, the machine that protects the machine woke up. The department's own internal affairs unit, the one that should have run the investigation, was quietly reorganized by an administrative memo, its lead investigator reassigned to patrol audit. A paperwork trick that stalled everything under a new chain of command that answered, at the top, to Deputy Chief Harlan Pruitt. The police union held a press conference and called the whole thing entrapment. Argued that a federal agent had lured a good officer into a trap. Argued that the real scandal was surveillance of the police. It was a grotesque inversion. And it worked. Because it always works a little. And the district attorney's office, rather than drop the charges against Elias Warner, rather than admit its star witness had perjured himself, signaled it intended to proceed. To argue, the footage was misleading. To save its own face, at the cost of a man's freedom. And Judge Sorensen, 16 years on the bench and every instinct in her tuned to defer to the badge, was inclined to let them try. The gun was on video. The lie was under oath. The complaints were in a cabinet. And none of it mattered. For one terrible week. Because the levers you pull to make evidence into justice were all being held down by the very hands the evidence pointed at. Elias watched it happen from a cell, which was its own particular cruelty. to have spent a career dismantling exactly this kind of machine, and now to be locked inside one, watching it protect itself in real time, unable to touch a single lever. He saw the union's press conference on a dayroom television bolted to the wall. He saw a man in a crisp uniform call him a liar and a trap. Saw the anchor nod thoughtfully along. He saw the reasonable, respectable faces of people, explaining why the footage might not mean what it so obviously meant. And for the first time in the entire ordeal, something in him that was not calm at all whispered that maybe this was simply how it ended. That maybe the truth, even on video, even in 4K, even time-stamped and unbroken and streamed to a federal server, was not going to be enough. That maybe it never had been. That maybe the reason he had needed 4 cameras and a federal badge in the first place was that the bare truth, all by itself, had never once in the history of this country been sufficient to save a man who looked like him. Elias Warner sat in a holding cell because they had not even released him yet. And Sarah Kessler sat across the glass from him at 2:47 in the morning, exhausted, and said, "They're going to bury it. Wade, they're actually going to bury it. I have the footage and they're going to bury it." And Elias Warner looked at her through the glass. And he said the thing that turned it around. "They already gave us the weapon," he said. "Look at what they just did. Reassigning that internal affairs investigator, moving the case under Pruitt. That wasn't a defense. That was obstruction of a federal civil rights investigation. Burying those 44 complaints under color of law wasn't cover. It was a crime. A fresh one. Committed this week. In writing, by a deputy chief." He almost smiled. They didn't protect Corbin. They walked into the frame right next to him. "Call the field office. Not about my arrest. About the memo." The exit was inside the cover-up itself. Every hand that reached out to bury the truth left its print on the shovel. The machine, in the act of protecting itself, had committed the exact federal crime that gave the federal government the authority to take the whole thing out of its hands. The next morning, the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division opened a pattern and practice investigation into the Marin Police Department, and the case stopped being Wade Corbin's word against a nobody. It became the United States. Holding a doorbell, the end came fast. The way these things do once the right door opens. Gulebrennan. The rookie. The one who had bagged the gun he knew was wrong. The one who had made the small, cowardly obedience on the welcome mat. Kyle Brennan sat down with federal investigators, and he told the truth. All of it. He testified that he never saw where the gun came from, that it was not on the porch when he arrived, that his sergeant had sent him to the car precisely when the drop was made, that he had known, in his gut, on the driveway, and had bagged it anyway because he was 3 months out of the academy and terrified of the wall. It cost him everything. He was fired for failing to report. He lost the pension he had barely started. He does construction now. But when he walked out of that courthouse after his testimony, people who saw him said he looked lighter than he had in months. He had lost a career. He had kept a soul. And of the two, only one of them was ever coming back if he'd chosen wrong. The accomplice above the accomplice fell next. Deputy Chief Harlan Pruitt, whose signature was on all 44 unfounded dispositions, who had signed the reassignment memo, was indicted on federal charges of conspiracy to deprive citizens of their civil rights and obstruction. The brotherhood he thought he belonged to, the one he believed would close ranks around him, sold him out in about 60 seconds the moment his own freedom was on the table. It always does. The wall of silence is real, right up until the wall needs someone to stand behind. And then it discovers it was never a wall at all. Just a lot of frightened men agreeing to look the same direction. Grant Whitlock. the prosecutor who had knowingly put a perjurer on the stand and tried to proceed anyway, was referred to the state bar and suspended pending review. Not prison. A reckoning sized to the crime, and Wade Corbin was convicted. Deprivation of rights under color of law, resulting in bodily injury, falsification of records, perjury, tampering with evidence. Not 430 years. No theatrical number that no human being will ever serve. 19 years in federal prison. A real sentence. For a real man. That he will really serve. Day by day. In a cell where the walls, for once, will not lie for him. Before the sentence was handed down, Wade Corbin was given the chance to speak. Men in his position usually weep, or blame their lawyers. Corbin did none of it. He stood. In the suit his union had bought him, and he did not raise his voice. And what came out of him was somehow worse than any outburst, because he meant every single word of it. "You all want to make me a monster," he said. And he was calm, almost gentle. "I understand. It is easier that way. But I want you to understand something before you send me down. For 16 years, I stood on a line that most of you have never even seen. On one side of that line is the neighborhood you sleep in at night. Your kids. Your dog. Your little camera on the door. On the other side is everything you are afraid of. And I held that line. Nobody thanked me for it. Nobody ever wanted to know how the streets got quiet. You just wanted them quiet. And you wanted your property values up. And you wanted to never, ever have to think about the men like me who made that happen." He looked at the jury, and several of them could not meet his eyes. "So, yes, maybe I got it wrong on that porch. Maybe I squared up a report or two over the years. But I kept this city safe while you slept. And now you are going to bury me for it. And one day, when that line finally breaks, because there is nobody left willing to stand on it, you are going to remember my name. And you are going to wish you had 100 more just like me." He sat down. He was not sorry. That was the most frightening thing about him. Not the cruelty, but the certainty. He was not a monster who knew he was a monster. He was a man who had looked at 44 ruined lives and a mother's dead son, and had built, brick by patient brick, a cathedral of justification tall enough to live inside. And he believed in it the way other men believe in God. Judge Sorensen, who a week earlier had been inclined to let the DA proceed, read the verdict. And then she did something judges rarely do. She looked down at Wade Corbin from the bench, over the top of her glasses, and she said, "You did not fail to see the truth. Mr. Corbin, it was read to you, over your own radio, on the night in question. The registered owner, the address, you heard it, and you closed the door of your cruiser on it anyway. That is not a failure of information. That is a decision. And it is the reason this court can find no mitigation." She paused. "You were not the line between civilization and chaos. Sergeant, you were a man with a filing cabinet full of people you decided did not count, remanded to federal custody. There was one more thing, and it was the thing that mattered most. And it was not a sentence at all. The Justice Department and the City of Marin entered into a consent decree, a binding, court-supervised agreement to overhaul the North District, mandatory functioning body cameras with tamper logs, independent civilian review of every complaint, an audit of every stop Corbin and Pruitt had ever made, and the man the Justice Department brought in to help draft the terms of that decree, from a careful, professional distance, having recused himself from the criminal case entirely, was a senior special agent named Elias Warner, who had spent 9 years learning exactly how a machine like this one is built, so that he would know exactly where to put the bolts to take it apart. The courtroom emptied slowly. Gloria Mercer was waiting in the gallery. Her son Terrence had been 20 years old. 3 years earlier, Wade Corbin had stopped him, had found in his backpack a quantity of narcotics that Terrence swore to his mother on the phone he had never seen before, and no one believed him. Because a sergeant's word was gold and a 20-year-old's was nothing, Terrence Mercer went into custody. And 3 days later, Terrence Mercer did not come out alive. And the department wrote it up and closed the file, and Pruitt signed it, and the world moved on. His mother never did. When the Justice Department audit reopened her son's case and found the same fingerprints, the same officer, the same buried complaint, the same signature, Terrence Mercer's conviction was posthumously vacated. It could not give him back. Nothing could give him back. But his name, in the official record of the state, no longer said dealer. It said exonerated. Gloria Mercer took Elias Warner's hand in both of hers in the emptying courtroom, and she could not speak for a while. And then she said, "Thank you for giving my boy his name back." And Elias Warner, who did not cry in courtrooms, had to look at the floor for a moment before he could answer her. So who won? Not Elias Warner. Understand that. The federal case, the indictments, the consent decree, that is not a victory. That is a consequence. Elias Warner had a badge in his wallet and 4 cameras on his house. He was always going to be believed. In the end, the system bent for him because he was carrying the one thing it respected. The people who won are the ones who were never going to be believed and did the right thing anyway. Dahlia Ford won. She is a civilian records clerk in the North District. And 11 years ago, when a deputy chief started ordering complaint files shredded, she quietly kept copies in a box at her house for 11 years on a clerk's salary with no protection and no promotion and no idea if it would ever matter. Dahlia Ford refused to let the paper disappear. When the Justice Department came, she handed over the box. 44 complaints. Whole. Because one woman decided the truth was worth keeping, even when no one was looking. She got no medal. Her salary did not change. She won anyway. When the federal investigators finally asked her why she had risked her job for 11 years to keep copies of files she had been ordered to shred. Files that, for all she knew, would never matter to a soul. Dahlia Ford looked at them as though the question itself made no sense. Because they were people. She said, "You don't shred people." That was the whole of her testimony. 4 words that a filing cabinet had spent 11 years refusing to understand. You don't shred people. The consent decree that followed did not fix Marin. Decrees do not fix places. People do. Slowly. When they are made to. But it changed the arithmetic. Every stop in the North District now generated a record that a civilian panel could actually read. Every complaint now landed on the desk of someone whose paycheck did not depend on burying it. Every camera now kept a tamper log, so that it malfunctioned could never again be a phrase a man hid behind. It was not justice. Exactly. It was infrastructure, the plumbing that makes justice possible in the first place. And it was more than the South blocks of Marin had ever been given before. Kyle Brennan won. In the only way that counts, he lost the job and kept the man. Renee Warner won. Standing at a window with a phone held low, filming instead of screaming, because her husband had taught her that the recording was worth more than the reaction. And 2 neighbors, the ones who let the curtain fall, who watched a man pressed against his own garage and decided it was none of their business. They did not win anything. They just have to live now, in a house across the street from the man they watched and did not help, knowing what they know about themselves. That is its own kind of sentence. Elias Warner walked out of the Marin courthouse alone, There were cameras at the bottom of the steps. Of course, a hungry knot of reporters wanting a soundbite, wanting him to spike the ball, wanting. Agent Warner. Is justice served? Agent Warner. Do you think the sentence was harsh enough? He stopped on the middle landing. He looked out at the city. The good side and the south blocks. The streets with the signs in the grass. And the streets without them. All of it, under the same gray autumn sky. He saw Kyle Brennan at the edge of the crowd in a work jacket. And he gave the younger man a small nod. And Brennan nodded back. And that was the whole conversation. And it was enough. Then Elias Warner did not walk down to the microphones. He did not give them the tirade. He did not say, "We will find you. We will bury you." He had refused the privilege of announcing himself in the cell, and he refused the privilege of the victory speech on the steps, because he understood something the cameras did not. He turned, instead, and he said one thing, quietly, to the reporter closest to him, a young woman who would put it at the top of her story that night. And it would be the line the whole city repeated. You want to know if justice was served. He looked at her, and he looked past her, at the street. This ended the way it ended, because I had a federal badge in my pocket and 4 cameras on my house. I was always going to be believed. So no. Don't celebrate this. Because the next man they stop on Larkspur Court, the one with no badge and no cameras and no wife at the window. What happens to him? He let the question sit there, in the cold, clean air, and he did not answer it, because that is the whole point. This is not a story with a happy ending. It is a story with a lucky one. Wade Corbin is in a federal cell tonight, not because the truth is powerful, but because this one rare time, the truth happened to be recording. And the man it protected happened to be someone the system was built to hear, somewhere in the city of Marin tonight. Another man is driving home. He is not a federal agent. There is no doorbell that cannot be turned off. He keeps his hands at 10 and 2, and he glances at the little camera on his own dashboard, the cheap one he bought last month, and he checks that the red light is on. Recording. Just in case. He shouldn't have to, but he does. If this one hit you, do 3 things. Hit that like button. It genuinely tells the algorithm to put stories like this one in front of more people. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next case. And tell me in the comments, was 19 years enough for Wade Corbin? Or does a man who does that to his own community deserve more? I read every reply, and I pin the best ones. Stay safe out there, and keep your cameras rolling. This story is a work of fiction. All persons, departments, and cities depicted are entirely fictional, and any resemblance to real people or real agencies is coincidental.